Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, Diligent, PwC, Center for Audit Quality, Spencer Stewart, the Conference Board, and Corporate Board Member, along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Diligence Boardroom Resources and the co-founder and editor-at-large of Corporate Board Member magazine. We're here in the Conference Board Studios in New York, and today we're going to be talking about the Corporate Secretary's role in onboarding new board members, or really onboarding board members. And joining me is somebody who's certainly a veteran corporate secretary and somebody we're happy to have on the show. Please welcome Paul Washington, who's the Senior Vice President, Deputy General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary for Warner Media Group. So welcome, Paul.
Thanks, glad to be here.
So you and I have known each other for a while, and
Yep.
I know that your work with the society and everything certainly gives you the veteran status to talk about this issue. And it's interesting because onboarding has certainly surfaced a lot more. We've got, in the Spencer Stewart study, we saw this year that there's more first-time directors than there has been in 10 years,
Right.
okay? We're seeing younger directors coming on. We know that many of those, this is their first board experience. And while they have a lot of knowledge, maybe in digital transformation, cyber, the things that you're looking for,
Right.
they don't know the inner workings of a board or how to do that. So, and I'm always fascinated by how companies value the corporate secretary. And you'll see some companies understand the role that they play to the board. They give them the leeway to take action on that stuff. And then you'll see other companies that sort of push that function pretty far down in the company. And when you only meet 4 times and the corporate secretary doesn't have that relationship. So maybe my first question is, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because we have some other juicy topics, but sort of what is the role in your mind of the corporate secretary and their relationship to the board?
Oh, in general, I think of the corporate secretary as sitting at the narrow point of an hourglass, basically. That information funnels from management to the board through the aperture of the board's time and attention, which is managed by the corporate secretary, and then it flows to the board, and then when the board is done making its decisions, it flows back from the corporate secretary, or others sometimes, out to management. So I think you sit at a critical juncture in terms of managing the information flow to and from the board.
So when I was
and not just sort of in an administrative fashion. You actually play a critical role, or can, in helping to shape the information that goes to the board, because if you've sat in all the board meetings and all the committee meetings, you know what the board knows and you know what it doesn't know, and you know what their interests are. And so often members who are either writing memos for the board or making presentations to the board don't know the audience that well. And so you can actually help match the message with the audience so that it resonates.
But that gets to my point, though.
Yeah.
Some never see the boardroom.
Right.
Okay,
Right. Yeah.
so they're operating in a very different role, I think, than those that say, okay, I've got this responsibility. I've got an education responsibility. There's changes coming down, continually, whether it's SEC or whatever. I mean, there's just, your hourglass, example is a perfect, example of and some of it you have to decipher. There's only X amount of time.
So that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I think it's a missed opportunity for companies that don't rely on their corporate secretary to do that, partly because in that case, it really does help to have one person who is aware of what the board knows and all the committees know, so you can help coordinate it, so you can make sure that the right people have the right information. If there are too many ways of getting to the board and to the committees in an uncoordinated fashion, then the board may not be allocating its time appropriately.
Yeah. Well, I guess our short message on the front part of this is if you're a director who, the company isn't recognizing their corporate secretary, I'll get a lot of good letters on that. But that's something. There's a valid reason for asking the question.
I think there
so
is.
Our topic,
and not just out of self-interest.
Yeah, of course not. We wanted to get to this onboarding thing, and so what's come back to us, we run an organization with Spencer Stewart called the Next Gen Board Leaders, and what's come back to us that one of the challenging things that this group said is there needs to be quite an uptick in onboarding. Now, my question to you is, when I think of onboarding, I think it almost has to be customized per the individual because you'll have CEOs come in that are very seasoned. Yes, they're going to need some history on the company. Hopefully they've done some of their homework themselves, which we'll talk about in a minute. But they're going to be very different to onboard, and they will be accepted by the group very differently. Then let's take a 35-year-old, that joins. It might be 20 years younger, maybe even more than the rest of the board. Hadn't served on a board before. So, am I just off base, or is it really a customization with everybody coming into the boardroom?
Look, I think there's a degree of customization. I think you do have to provide your new directors with some basic information, both during the recruiting process and then during the onboarding process. During the recruiting process, you let them know how the board operates. You provide them with public filings and all that. And then when they are on the board, you provide them with a strategic plan, business plan and so forth. You also should set up meetings with the general counsel, the CFO, the head of human resources, your division heads, internal, external auditors. So I think there's sort of a baseline level of education that you provide to new directors. But I do think it varies depending on the director. I wouldn't assume that someone who actually comes with a background in the industry even doesn't need to be educated deeply about your company. But I think in some cases, especially with new directors who haven't served on a public company board before, you probably want to spend more time with them talking about their fiduciary duties, talking about, if it's a public company board, obviously securities laws and things like that. And I think the corporate secretary is in a sort of terrific position to give the new director a sense of what it's like to be on the board. The new director, should have gathered some of that through meeting with the other board members, but you can probably be a little more candid about how the meeting actually unfolds. And if you become someone that the new director turns to for a little bit of advice, you can help guide them a little bit, because they will wonder, did I overstep? Did I talk too much? It can be a little heavy-handed to have either the CEO or the lead independent director or someone else say, oh, you went over the line there, or something like that. But sometimes new directors, just like members of management, will come to the corporate secretary and say, how'd I do?
Well, and the big issue, one of the things that came up is all of the directors that we talked to felt that a mentor was important, and that way, it's not as daunting, let's say, but you're right, they should, and by the way, most of them did not have a mentor, in the program, so they said that's a big issue that people should change right away, but that would give them two avenues to sort of find out things, and the example that they gave is, they came into their second board meeting and found that everybody was talking in between board meetings, but nobody either invited them to talk or they didn't know how to get involved in the conversation. So there's a nuance, that happened, and some of that is the person's responsibility, and some of that is the board's responsibility to recognize that they're not in those conversations.
And look, one of the things I agree, a mentor, mentors are pretty common on nonprofit boards. I think they're less common on public company boards. But one thing that person can do, too, is get to know the new director a little more deeply. And let's say you've got a board where you've got a group of CEOs of large companies. It can feel a little bit like a club within the board, right? But if one of those individuals, and you have to choose the right one, but if one of those individuals actually becomes the mentor, that person can sort of say, you know what, this person belongs on our board. It's not a two-tiered board where it's like, these are the real long-standing directors, and this is the person we brought on to fill just this particular gap or something like that. So I think that can help,
Well, that's a great segue, because was my next. So, we've broken down the onboarding into the company's responsibilities, the existing board members, the tenured board's responsibility, and then the individual candidate's responsibility. So you just talked about the board member's responsibility, the need to recognize, that this is somebody that we should extend a hand to, particularly if there's a big gap in age difference. How do we make this person feel comfortable and useful and get the most out of them on that side? So you sort of covered one of those. So let's talk about, pick like some of the most important issue with the company, what you need to make sure, and then the individual themselves, because they have a responsibility as well.
Sure. Let me start with the individual, actually, if I might. I think their responsibility is to read what they're given, to meet with everyone. And by the way, the process of onboarding takes a while. I mean, to do it right, it can take a while. And to ask questions as they go along. I think it's not to be shy, and it's probably their responsibility to try to get educated as much as possible actually outside the board meetings. It's fine to ask questions within the board meetings, but if you sort of come on off the bat asking a whole ton of questions that everyone else already knows the answers to, that will annoy your fellow directors. I don't care whether you're a sitting CEO or you're brand new to any kind of corporate environment. So I think pursuing your education outside the boardroom is something that's really helpful for an individual director to do.
If we don't cover anything else, that is such an excellent recommendation, and you're absolutely right. If you want to be annoying, just ask questions that everybody else in the room knows, and take the time away from constructive things. That's such a good recommendation for the individual.
And the company's responsibility, I mean, that's a pretty broad question. I really think it is to make sure that the director becomes a fully effective contributing member of the board over time, because it does take a while. I think, and it's a team effort. I think the corporate secretary plays a strong role in that, but it really is a group effort to make sure that the director not only feels welcome, is informed, but is also given opportunities to contribute. So this may rest with the chairman or CEO or the lead independent director or even the mentor, but to give that person a chance to prove that they can contribute. Because the more that they're able constructively to contribute, the better the dynamic is in the boardroom, the sooner they'll be accepted as a new board member, and frankly, they'll bring the value that they're supposed to bring to the whole enterprise. So.
Well, it's great advice from somebody who has been there, done that. So, Paul, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to come in and have us talk about this onboarding topic. So
really
appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms, brought to you with Knowledge Partners, Diligent, PwC, Center for Audit Quality, Spencer Stewart, the Conference Board, and Corporate Board Member, along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.